The biting cold of Washington wrapped around every street corner, while the roads near St. John's Episcopal Church, just a few steps from the White House, were flooded with cameras, journalists, and a crowd eager to witness history unfold. Barron Trump, now an 18-year-old young man, stepped out of the presidential limousine alongside his parents. He maintained the firm posture he had been taught, but inside, his heart was restless. How many lives had changed on this very street? How many men had walked through these same doors, carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, unsure if they were truly ready for what lay ahead? History had the power to transform, but it could also crush those who weren't prepared. The icy wind stung his face, but he barely noticed. Time seemed to slow down as he gazed at the entrance of the church. It was as if this moment marked a turning point, and deep inside he felt something unexpected was about to happen. His eyes scanned the crowd until he saw her, an elderly woman wrapped in a worn-out coat, staring at him with a calm yet intense expression. It wasn't the gaze of a fan or a political critic. It was something else, something he couldn't quite decipher at first. But before he could react, her voice cut through the chaos around him. "And you, young man, do you intend to be president one day?" Barron stopped. The question hit him like a blow, and he felt every muscle in his body tense. People had always talked about it, but no one had ever asked him like that, so directly as if expecting something deeper than a rehearsed answer. For a second, he didn't know what to say. Around him, advisors murmured. Security agents moved closer, and his mother gave him a subtle glance, waiting for him to ignore the woman and continue into the church. But something about her held him in place. He felt like she wasn't there by chance, and maybe, just maybe, that question was far more important than it seemed at first. The murmur of the crowd seemed to fade, as if time had momentarily slowed down. Barron blinked, trying to process the question. It wasn't a provocation, nor did it seem like mere curiosity. It was as if this woman saw something in him that he had yet to discover about himself. Her gaze carried no malice, no flattery, only a deep curiosity, as if she were looking past the surface, seeing something even he wasn't fully aware of. But before he could respond, an advisor hurriedly approached, whispering that the service was about to begin. He hesitated for a moment, but he knew he couldn't just stand there. He followed his parents into the church, but the woman's question followed him too, echoing in his mind like distant thunder. With each step he kept asking himself, why did this bother him so much? He had grown up hearing that his future was already mapped out, that the White House could be his one day if he wanted it. But did he truly want it? Was he even prepared to carry such a heavy burden? Or was he simply walking the path others had paved for him? The church's solemn atmosphere, the stained glass windows filtering the cold winter light, casting colorful reflections on the wooden pews. Everything should have felt familiar. The pastor spoke about purpose and calling, about how some people were chosen to lead. Every word seemed directed at him, as if the sermon itself was a warning of something bigger. He glanced at his father, who listened intently, his posture rigid, his confidence unwavering. Donald Trump always seemed certain of his place, but what about him? The unease inside. Barron only grew stronger. Would he ever feel that same certainty? The sermon continued, but his mind drifted elsewhere. The woman's words returned with even more force, bringing a storm of doubts. What did it truly mean to be president? Was it just a title, an inevitable fate, or something that demanded more than just bearing a powerful last name? Was it possible to choose a different path? Or had his future been sealed from birth? These weren't easy questions, but one thing was clear. He needed to find the answers before it was too late. The pastor's voice continued to echo through the church, but Barron could no longer focus. His heart was pounding and his mind was trapped in the same question. What if one day he did become president? The thought wasn't new, but for the first time he was facing it head-on, without the filters of other people's expectations. Power wasn't just a privilege. It was a burden that could crush those who weren't ready. He wondered how many leaders had felt the same uncertainty before stepping into their roles. How many believed they were prepared, only to realize the responsibility was far greater than they imagined. He looked at his father, sitting in the front row, listening to every word with confidence of a man who always knew he belonged there. Donald Trump never seemed to doubt himself, but Barron was different. He had grown up in the shadow of this empire, yet he never truly felt like he belonged to it. Could he carry this legacy, or would it consume him? The feeling of being pulled by an invisible current became stronger. There was no room for hesitation, no space for doubt. At least that's what everyone said. But what if true strength was found in questioning, not just in accepting? He thought back to stories he had read about Abraham Lincoln, one of the greatest presidents in American history. They said Lincoln spent countless nights sleepless, tormented by the weight of his decisions. He didn't seek power for glory, but for what he could do with it. What if leadership wasn't about control, but about sacrifice? A shiver ran down Barron's spine. His last name would open doors. But did that mean he was meant to walk through them? Or was the true test of a leader knowing when to step back, even when the world expected them to move forward? The sermon ended and silence filled the church. People rose slowly, whispering among themselves, preparing to leave. Barron took a deep breath, feeling as if something inside him had shifted. He needed answers, and to find them, he knew he had to return to where everything started. The woman standing outside the church. The cold morning air felt even sharper as Barron stepped out of the church, but he barely noticed. His mind was still tangled in the thoughts that had consumed him throughout the service. Every step toward the exit felt heavier, as if he were carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. He knew he was supposed to follow his parents to the next part of the inauguration schedule, but something inside him wouldn't let him just keep walking. He needed to speak to the woman. She was still there, standing in the same place, as if she had been waiting for him all along. Advisors rushed around him, nudging him toward the convoy, but Barron did something unexpected. He stopped right in front of her. For a brief moment, there was silence between them, an unspoken understanding hanging in the air. The woman didn't look surprised. On the contrary, her eyes held a knowing calm, as if she had always expected this moment to happen. "Why did you ask me that?" He finally broke the silence, his voice steadier than he expected. The woman smiled slightly, as if she had all the time in the world to answer. "Because I've seen many men walk through these doors thinking they knew everything, only to leave without knowing who they truly were," she said, her voice laced with nostalgia and wisdom. "The question I asked wasn't about politics. It was about destiny. Do you believe you have a choice?" Barron swallowed hard. That question caught him off guard. His whole life, he had felt like someone being pulled by an unstoppable current, unable to swim in any other direction. But was that really true? Had he never had a choice? Or had he just never had the courage to question the path others assumed was his? The woman's gaze didn't waver as she looked at him. "Your name will open doors, young man," she continued. "But do you know where those doors lead?" Barron felt a chill run down his spine. He had never thought about it like that before. For the first time, he realized that the greatest challenge wasn't bearing the Trump name. It was deciding what to do with it. Barron remained silent, absorbing the woman's words like a puzzle he was just beginning to piece together. His idea that power wasn't just a right but a choice struck him in a way he never expected. He had grown up surrounded by security, visors, and people who spoke about the future as if it had already been written. But now for the first time he wondered, what if it hadn't? The woman wasn't treating him as an inevitable heir to a dynasty. She was treating him as someone who still had something to prove. She let out a sigh, as if she carried the weight of many stories before this one. I've seen presidents take office with courage, and I've seen others destroy everything because they weren't ready, she said, her gaze deep and unwavering. The real danger isn't in those who seek power. It's in those who accept it without understanding what it demands. Barron felt his stomach tighten. He knew his last name would give him opportunities, but did that mean he should take them? Leadership isn't inherited, it's built, the woman continued. And to know if you're ready, you need to ask yourself if you're willing to carry the weight of something bigger than yourself. He looked down at his hands, feeling that this conversation was far more significant than he had initially thought. If he said yes to the future everyone expected of him, would it be for himself or for them? For the first time, he realized that being a leader wasn't just about following a predetermined path, but about understanding why he was walking it. The crowd was beginning to stir, reporters inching closer, sensing that something important was happening. The moment was slipping away, but before he could turn to leave, the woman tilted her head slightly and whispered something that sent a chill through his entire body. Your name may take you to the presidency, Barron, but will your heart be able to keep you there? He felt the weight of those words deep in his soul, and at that moment he knew he didn't have all the answers yet, but he was getting closer to asking the right question. The flashes from the cameras flickered like silent lightning around Barron, but he didn't move. The woman's words still echoed in his mind. His whole life he had heard advisors discuss the future of the Trumps, the weight and power that came with his name. But for the first time, he no longer saw himself as just an extension of his father. He was a person, someone who had the right to decide his own fate. He lifted his eyes, locking onto the woman's, and knew he had to answer. He took a deep breath and without hesitation spoke words that made the world around him fall into complete silence. You asked me if I want to be president one day, but that's not the right question. The journalists who had been murmuring stopped talking, some even lowering their cameras, waiting for what would come next. The woman raised an eyebrow slightly, as if she had already expected him to say that. Barron felt his heart race, but his voice remained steady. He knew his words would be analyzed, debated, and criticized, but for the first time, he didn't care. For the first time, he was speaking not as an heir, but as someone choosing his own path. The right question is, one day will I be worthy of being president? A deep silence settled over the crowd. Barron's words had disarmed even the most skeptical journalists. This wasn't the answer of a boy born into privilege. It was the answer of someone who understood that power wasn't just given, it had to be earned. For a moment, no one knew what to say, but the woman with a small knowing smile simply nodded as if her purpose there had been fulfilled. The sharp Washington wind blew fiercely in that moment, as if carrying the weight of Barron's words through the air. The crowd was still silent, trying to grasp what had just happened. The president's son, long seen as nothing more than a reflection of his father, had just done something unexpected. He had stepped out of the shadow of his last name and shown the world that his future would not be dictated by expectations, but by his own choices. The cameras flashed again, the reporters exchanged glances, realizing they had just witnessed a moment that might be remembered for years to come. The elderly woman remained still for a moment, her eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction, as if she had known all along that this was the answer he would give. She didn't praise him, didn't try to prolong the conversation. She simply gave him a small smile, one that seemed to say, "Now you understand," and without another word, she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Barron stood there, unmoving, feeling as if something inside him had shifted forever. For the first time, he realized that power wasn't a birthright. It was something that had to be carried with purpose, dignity, and a true sense of responsibility. His parents' voices called him back to reality. It was time to move on to the next event of the inauguration. But now Barron walked differently. He was no longer just a boy carrying a famous last name. He was someone who had begun to understand that his worth was not in where he came from, but in what he chose to do with it. The woman's question had never really been about politics. It had been about the kind of man he wanted to become, and he knew that this was an answer that would take years to fully shape. The official car pulled away, heading toward the next stop, but inside Barron was already on a different journey. The words from that morning would stay with him for the rest of his life, and if one day he returned to that same church, perhaps it wouldn't just be to attend a ceremony, but to stand before the nation and decide with the certainty he was still searching for, whether he was truly worthy of the destiny that so many had already written for him. Because in the end, leadership is not a title, it is a choice. If this story touched your heart in any way, share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how it made a difference for you. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories that truly matter. Your engagement means the world to us as we continue to spread messages like this one. Together, let's turn small actions into big changes.